I wish the various companies that rely on search, like say Google, and actually YouTube is owned by Google, right? So Google, I wish there was a mode that you could say, don't show me things like what I typed, only show what I typed. But I guess that would kill all their advertising dollars.
See, the thing is that for me, you can actually do that, by the way, Chris.
How? How do I do that?
Quote what you want, quote. Okay. Only look for what you're looking for. Just put a quote around what your search, quote, or quotes around what you search. You'll find a lot less things.
Doesn't a plus sign do similar things?
No.
Plus between words.
There's a lot of there's probably a whole second hour on Google Ninja Skills.
We could do a day a week on Google Ninja Skills.
Yeah.
I think.
Yeah, there's, in my family, the saying is, it's not what you know, it's how well you Google.
It's true.
Yes.
Chris, we're going to have to take your internet card away from you.
You're more than welcome.
You got to get certified now. I mean, they really, in K through 12, they should about fifth grade, they should be teaching Google skills. There should be like a class that you get just on Google.
I 100% agree.
And then the next class will be Midjourney. Kids would love Midjourney classes.
Guys in your internet stuff.
Yeah. The internet track. How to use Facebook. Uninstall it from your phone.
I'm waiting for the techno weenie AI.
Step 1, uninstall the 8-bit Metro AI.
I have a couple things to ship. I have a couple things to show at the second hour, and then if anyone else has anything, just raise your hand in the question, or if you want to talk about it. And then we got a lot of questions stacking up for it, so my presentation will be short. Hi, everyone. Welcome to Office Hours. If you're watching on YouTube, you can find out more about what we do at officehours.global. Our first hour is general discussion about digital and virtual media production. And our second hour is usually something we want to spend a little bit more time on. And today we're going to talk a little bit about graphics for broadcast, but using presentation tools. I think that a lot of times people feel like they have to learn After Effects or Motion or something else that's more complicated to just build some basic graphics. And you can actually use your favorite presentation tool to do some of those things. So we'll show a little bit about how that actually can work in the second hour. So stay tuned for that. Let's go ahead and jump in. We have a lot of questions today. I have to say that it really is great. If you're a producer out there watching, it's really great when we open up the door and there's like 20 questions that are already there. It makes it a lot easier. So thanks so much for everyone who threw those questions in. Let's go ahead and jump to the questions. Mitch, what do we got?
First one, top of the stack, Graham Cardwell from Belfast, Northern Ireland asked, looking for an affordable lav to go with my Sennheiser G3 radio kit. The existing one has gone a bit muffled. I guess from too much weather exposure. It's used almost exclusively on pitch for sports, and it's not clear enough for the indoor stuff.
Go ahead, Courtney.
Well, if you can't afford the COS 11s, the Sankens, Deity makes some lavalier microphones that are affordable, around $100. So you might look at those. You might have to have it rewired or have it wired for that locking collar mini plug that fits into the G3 radios. Also, Sennheiser makes them more expensive. The M2, I think, is the one that they ship with those, which is not a very good lavalier. It sounds a little muffled to begin with. The MKE2, which is confusing because it's another Sony lavalier, Sounds a lot better, but it's about 3 times as expensive. It's about $300 as well. So you might look in that neighborhood if you want really good, clear stuff. Or the Senken Cost 11 is actually pretty good. The Countryman, if you're using it on the pitch and in inclement weather and on sweaty people, the Countryman makes a waterproof version, which will work for you quite well. But it's also not cheap.
Good, Mitchell.
Yeah, Courtney's correct. And here's your cost 11. It's funny because, for a mic that costs this much, it looks like a piece of shrink wrap tubing attached to a wire. That's the little guy right there. That's all there is to it. And I agree, it's a bit expensive, but if you want to have it for life, it'll last you.
Yeah, I mean, the the ME2, which is what ships with it, is, as I said, not the best lav in the world. So you just have to decide, and you're not going to find something for less than the ME2 that's going to be better, in my opinion. So you are going to be going upwards if you decide you want something. And as been mentioned here before, you may want to go with something that's more durable, that might last longer. And if you count the years that you use it, as opposed to when you replace it, it might be worth, maybe more affordable in the long run. Next question.
Next one in from Andy Kokendorfer in Vieira, Florida, asking, what would you consider to be the 5 most important aspects for speech intelligibility on Zoom? Think of these as short, bulleted list for C-levels. Thanks.
Go ahead, Chris.
I mean, there's all the things, Andy, I won't go into the technology, but I'm sure John will. I will say this, just a couple weeks ago, I was having a Zoom meeting, actually it may have been Teams, with one of my clients. It's a woman I've worked with for over 20 years. And I literally could not understand about a third of what she was saying because she had opted to dial in through her phone. And in their corporate culture, that's a standard way of doing it. And it made me, her excuse made me think of one of the things that Alex always says, that, what do you say, Alex? It can be easy to make or easy to watch, but it can't be both. And her push was, well, I move around a lot and it's just easier to carry my phone. And I said, let me show you something. And what I had done is, we'd sat through this meeting, and at the end of the meeting, I said, hey, can I have 5 minutes of your time afterward? Yeah, sure. And I said to her, listen, I respect you. I've very much enjoyed working with you all these years, but I couldn't understand about a third of what you said in that meeting. Well, how come? Here, let me play you. And I played her a recording from the meeting, and she's like, oh my God, I had no idea it was that bad. And I think that's what happens is people feel like, oh,
this is
so easy. It must be good.
When you don't play it back for folks, it's like them getting ready for work without a mirror, like, or getting ready to go out without a mirror, like that's the,
yes.
And they don't know what they look like. They just put it on. And so everyone's sitting there without a mirror. And when you play it back, we've done that with clients a lot with video and audio. Video, you can see a little bit because they're next to each other. This is why, if you're in our business, you have to have a good setup. Like, you have to have a reasonably good setup. I mean, minimal viable is like Chris's. No, I'm just kidding.
Wow. Or you could work in your den with a bunch of old, decrepit gear behind you.
Exactly. Anyway, but you have to have some, like, if you look at Chris and I, when we're talking to clients, that's going to give them, that's level setting, for what they need to look like, and it doesn't mean they have to be as good as the what we have here, but they can see that oftentimes they can see the difference. I see a lot of folks that work in our field that are like, well, I'm not on air, so I can prep them, but I don't need to look good. It's just them that need to look good. Well, they don't understand why it's important if you don't look good. So looking and sounding good and having a good setup is really important for those of us that do what we're doing. Yeah, go ahead, Chris.
But playing it back for her was eye-opening. Yeah. It wasn't completely transformative. It was like 50%. She's not going to show up with an outboard mic, but I made her realize that her phone was not acceptable. And then we went through the other built-in mics that she had. And as it turns out, using the laptop speaker was a world better than using the phone.
Right.
And I will say that you don't want to do that with everybody. I have a long relationship with this woman. I've worked with her for decades now, and she trusts my opinion. So it was it was welcome feedback.
And sometimes I don't go right quite on the nose. So I go, hey, let's do a test. Let's do a real quick test. And we just want to do this, and we'll play it back for you so you can see if it's showing up the way you want. We've got a couple graphics we're throwing on and stuff like that. I'll say, like, we're working on a couple things. We just want to get your feedback on how we're building your frame. And then I play it back for them, and then they're like, what happened to the audio? What happened to the audio? And you're like, well, that's just the way it's showing up for us. But I don't tell them there's anything wrong. I just show them, like, hey, we're just going to play this back.
That's cute, but I know her well enough. I don't actually have to do that.
But I'm just saying that's the soft. Yeah. That's the soft way to do it. It's like, if you can just review something for us and let us know what this if this.
She would say, "You're wasting my time. What are you trying to tell me?"
Yeah, exactly. Go ahead, John.
Your bulleted list should be volume in order of importance. If they can't hear you, they're not going to be able to understand you. If you're too loud, you're going to hurt their ears. Cadence, that's the rhythm which you speak, as well as the speed at which you speak. Enunciation, how well do you articulate especially the T's and the S's? Vocabulary, if you're using jargon, people will understand you. And lastly, tone.
Go ahead, Mitchell.
Yeah, I think that covers it. You know the song, Make the Low Go Bigger. I think Get the Microphone Closer should be the song that we sing. Because I can tell you that 9 times out of 10, if there's a problem, it's they're talking from the other end of the room, or they bought a MacBook and they just expect that mic to be perfect for what they're using it for. And that's not it. You have to intervene and be your own best advocate.
Yeah, from a technical perspective, what we pay the most attention to is the first thing is just not breaking up. And usually the breaking up part comes from Wi-Fi. So that's why the first thing we do is try to get people on Ethernet because their Wi-Fi, the funny thing is you'll work with a big company and this is when we've got a huge connection to the building. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. Even if they do it's how many devices are moving in and out of that AP's range. So your access points range. It's how many devices are moving in and out of it. It doesn't matter. So if you're in a big apartment building, if you're in an office that has lots of people walking in, it's dropping packets. Now, if you are in the country in the middle of nowhere and you're using Wi-Fi and no one's there, it will be as good as Ethernet. That's the trick. Like if you're, nothing else is happening, you're going to be fine. But if anything's moving around, that's when you're losing frames and you get what we call microstalls. And that's probably the most noticeable thing that people do. They freeze for a second or you hear them dropping out and it happens almost all the time when you are on Wi-Fi. The second thing is roominess. So we listen for it, and that's hard rooms, so hard surfaces. And that comes back to what Mitchell was talking about, that you're a little too far away, but a lot of too far away also has to do with the mic. So the how far away you are plus mic placement and how far away you are. So you can get closer and make up for a lot of problems when you're closer to the mic. You can get further away, but you have to have a really soft room. And so you just got to figure out what that is. Volume, as John said, full spectrum. So most of what we hear here with these mics are pretty full spectrum. So you hear as low as the mic goes and as high as it goes. A lot of things get muffled, when you're using other mics and so on and so forth. And it sounds really muffled. And if you're in it, and it's okay as long as you don't hear it against somebody who does have full spectrum. And finally, presence. And that's usually in the 4 to 6K range. That presence will come up or down based on, and that's usually some kind of EQ or it's the nature of the mic. But that's the final thing that you worry about. You don't usually worry about that because most of the time the other ones are broken. Next question.
Next question from Jeffrey Reyes in Bronx, New York. Alex, in yesterday's office hours, you mentioned specs for all monitors that you buy. There was no mention of speakers. Do your monitors have integrated speakers, or do you prefer getting sound from dedicated speakers connected to the system?
I have to admit, I don't even know if my monitors have speakers. They might have speakers. I don't use them. I don't use the speakers in the TV. I don't like the idea that a thing that pushes video will also push audio doesn't occur for me. I always have something else that I'm listening to. Go ahead, Mitchell.
Yeah, it also depends. I mean, if you're going to do critical listening, then you want really good near-field monitors. The big monitors up on the wall like they have in the studios is kind of falling out of favor. I have a set of Channel X that I've had for ages, and yes, they're expensive, but consider the fact if you only had to buy one set of speakers for the rest of your life, wouldn't it make sense? Wouldn't you get a decent ROI?
My biggest problem is if there are speakers in it and we push video to it and suddenly sound starts coming out of the there, it's like now I've got free sound floating around. So I would probably prefer to have monitors without speakers. Go ahead, Courtney.
Yeah, I like monitors with speakers only because it lets me check to see if sound is embedded in the HDMI signal,
Yeah.
and then I turn them off. For speakers, I've been using these small Bluetooth speakers like this that you can control separately. They're battery powered and or DC powered off of 5 volts, like that Anchor there for about $25, and they give you much better sound than you can get out of the speakers that are built into a monitor. The speakers that are built into a monitor usually just don't have enough loudness to use very well, and controlling the signal level on them is sometimes problematic with touch buttons on the side of the monitor that you hit constantly. It's just a big mess.
The one time I like to have speakers in my TV is when I'm checking for sync. So if I'm looking for sync, I want to I want those speakers to be in the monitor, because otherwise you don't know if your sound is coming out of any other device other than the monitor itself. And so usually I want a monitor. Usually it's a laptop for me, but it can be a monitor. But I want the speakers to be in there, and that's the only time, excuse me, that I worry about it. And usually those are production monitors that have a headphone jack, or Sony makes a bunch of these. Next question.
From Paul Wallace in Austin, Texas, how is SIGGRAPH shaping up for those who didn't make the all-hands meeting on Monday?
Yeah, so the SIGGRAPH's looking good. We're working on whether we're going to have a permanent, a real physical space there. So we're going to hopefully figure that out over the next couple days. We have a good team that's coming together. Brian Shand and Raj are going to be running the. Brian and Raj, who worked on the last one, are going to be managing that. Raj Shandel is managing the on the ground, and Brian is managing the cloud. We're probably not going to do a lot of VOD. We may try to do a few shorts, but that's about it. Outside of that, it's really going to be live. We're looking at doing live for all 3 days, but only for a couple hours each. That's going to allow us to do some experimentation and evolve a little bit as we go. So, but we do plan to do after hours during the time all around it. And that's where we're at right now. Go ahead, Courtney.
If you want to borrow my cart with a battery, it's available again.
Very good.
Pick it up.
I'm probably, the funny thing is I'm probably going to get a beefier cart. I'm sold on the cart. I love your cart, but I'm just like, I need more cart. Like it was, you have to admit, we were hanging everything on that cart that you could possibly hang on.
I was a little worried about it.
Yeah. So I think that I'm probably going to go to Film Tools when I get down there and just buy something that's more of a, like one of those little ones that you can put together. So we'll see. Next question.
Next up, Robert Sababity from Poland asking, what are the best ways to maintain speakers in frame that either move around at their desk or move around on stage?
I'll go ahead, Courtney.
Put a cardioid microphone on a stand that they have to speak into and that they can hear. And then they know if they wander away from that microphone, no one can hear them, and make sure they can hear themselves if they're listening on headphones. That way they know they're in the right spot and they won't move. That's the easiest way. Either that or hire a camera operator. If you hire a camera operator, they can follow them around on the stage wherever they go.
Go ahead, Chris.
You put sandbags on their feet if they're standing.
Yeah, that works great. Yeah, exactly.
Actually, there is a product. It's a little T-shaped sandbag.
Yep,
I don't know if you've ever seen those.
I thought you were going to say nail gun.
Yeah, exactly.
Nail gun would work too. It's other issues, but the T-shaped ones are kind of nice because if you could bump it, you could feel it. It's almost like Braille for the feet.
Yeah. The what we end up doing a lot now when they're sitting and they're moving around, it's really hard to kind of manage that. Other than letting them know that when they do that, we have a bunch of graphics that are going around them, and those graphics won't work, and we can't turn them on if they move over to one side or the other. And again, this comes back to sometimes showing them what it looks like when they don't do it correctly. And again, it's caged inside of, hey, just let us know what you think of this. And then they're like off like this, and they're like, why am I getting cut off? I was like, well, because you moved over there, And so that it's kind of the passive aggressive way of getting them to stay centered. When we talk to folks on stage, there are we consider presenters to be trained or untrained. When it comes to that, you can always tell someone who's trained because while they're setting something up, they'll be walking on stage, and while they're making a point, they'll be standing on stage. And they'll do that because they know how to do that because someone told them to do it. No one knows to do it by accident. So if you explain to them when they're doing rehearsals, and it has to be in rehearsals, and oftentimes it has to be rehearsals over a series of events because they don't listen to you at the beginning, and then they watch their video later and they go, Oh, right. And so you have to kind of sometimes set them up so they understand what the issue is, and then if they watch their own pieces, that thing that you told them. So you have to get, with a lot of these kinds of things, you have to be patient. It may not happen when you said it. It happens 3 or 4 times after you said it, and you say it quietly and let it sink in. And so what happens is, what you want them to do is, well, they can walk to another part of stage so they can address a different part of the audience. But when they make their point, and what we try to show them is, when they make their point, stop a couple seconds before that, because that allows our cameras to zoom in and give them that cinematic shot, so they look amazing when they say what's important to them, and so they can really make their point. Whereas if they're walking, we show them we have to cut wider, so we have to cut back for you because you're walking. And so nothing matters anymore. And that's what you tell them, is like, nothing you say it's all equal. Like, you might as well speak monotone, because if you're walking all the time, it's just like speaking monotone, because we're cutting wide because we can't keep up with you. Whereas if you stop and to make a point, it's like freezing. Like, okay, here's the deal. When you say that, or when you say whatever that is, you want to be standing somewhere, not walking somewhere. And you can tell someone who's gone through that training, because they'll get good at it. And then what you do is you start spiking the floor. Spiking the floor means putting little T's, like what Chris was talking about, but usually we just do it with tape. But putting little T's, like, I'm going to stand here, I'm going to stand, and there's a couple spikes, and you'll see them kind of walk over to those, and really good speakers will get really good at it, and they will be within a foot of anywhere in the world on that stage. When they're giving the presentation, they're in exactly the same place, and that it just allows us to make them look better, and that's what you have to kind of explain to them, why that mechanic works. And again, if you only get to talk to the speaker once, chances of it impacting will be very low. But if you get to work with speakers over and over again, if you quietly talk about that a little bit, and especially with other people while they're around, it sinks in. Sometimes I find that talking slightly loud to another speaker will affect the speaker that I'm actually trying to talk to. So it's not like yelling at them, just talking like a little bit loud enough so they can hear me. But I'll raise my voice just a little bit so that someone that I'm actually trying to make the point to can hear it in their periphery. And that's sometimes way more effective than telling them. Next question.
Alexander Knight from Vancouver, British Columbia, Canada asked, I have a setup for my M2 Mac Mini, but I'm finding my Apple LED cinema displays don't work. I'm using a mini DisplayPort to DisplayPort adapter and then convert that into HDMI. Has anyone got these to work on current Macs?
Go ahead, John.
I suspect it's in your cables rather than in the monitors themselves. I know that I've had a lot of trouble converting from DisplayPort to HDMI. There's only one specific active cable that I've gotten to work. That's what I would look at.
Next question.
David Brady from New York, New York. If presented with limited internet connections, but you had 2 USB Ethernet adapters, could you use internet sharing and effectively get an ATEM on the network via the Mac?
You can. Inside the network preferences, you can do, inside of sharing, you can do network sharing, and you can say, I want to share from this to this. And you can share from one Ethernet to another. You can also share from a Wi-Fi connection to a Ethernet connection. So you might have a MiFi, for instance. You can plug that into your computer and say, I want to use that MiFi, but I want to pass it out of my MiFi as an Ethernet to one of those Ethernet adapters. You can do this, so there's a lot of different ways that you can, share any connection going into the computer with another connection going out. Next question.
Paul Wallace in Austin, Texas has a question. Yesterday, we talked about barbecue, but we didn't touch on barbecue tech. Does anyone have a high-tech grill or smoker, or know of one they can recommend?
Go ahead, Mitchell.
Yeah, question first is whether it's Memphis, Kansas City, Texas, and a multitude of other versions, but I used a Big Green Egg.
Yeah, go ahead, Chris.
If it doesn't have Bluetooth, it's not worth buying. There are, as Traeger has some smokers and grills and stuff that have Bluetooth thermostats that'll notify you when your meat hits the desired temperature.
Next question.
Next one in, I have a question. What brand of cleaning supplies do you use to clean your lenses?
Go ahead, Courtney.
Well, I used to use the Kodak lens cleaning solution, which is distilled water and alcohol. And then I started making my own. And I've lately been using for our prompter glass. I don't know if I'd use it on a coated lens, although we do use it on prompter glass, and I've used it for years without any problems, is Sprayway makes which you can get almost anywhere at Home Depot, an aerosol cleaner that has no ammonia in it. That's the important part. It has a detergent, and it's a spray, and it has no ammonia, and it has alcohol, and evaporates quickly. I'd be careful. I'd test it on an old lens you don't like very first, but I don't think it'll attack the coating on the lens. But to be safe, Kodak lens cleaning fluid.
Go ahead, Mitchell.
Yeah, I did ask the question of my DP friend who also works at a rental house, and he checks a lot of cameras, very high-end cameras, lots of lenses, like cooked lenses, which are worth like $250,000. And I was, well, what do you use? What do you actually use? Not how you do it. And he says Pancro Pro is the solution that he uses, and Kim wipes. Make sure you get the green ones that are lint-free. And those two products seem to work the best for keeping the smudges off the lenses.
And the big thing to remember also is if your lens is a little dirty, you want to use a blower first. So you can get these blowers that kind of look like little missiles oftentimes, and you kind of blow them off. You want to get any large particulate off the lens so that you don't drive it into the lens when you wipe it. I have to admit that I have kind of moved. I do a lot of things. I do have some lint-free things, but I use these Care Touch. These are single use. I don't have to do it all day, every day. And so I use these because I know that they're clean. And they come out and they've got a little bit of alcohol on them, I think, or I don't know if it's alcohol, but it's something in it. But this is what I clean my lenses with because it's, I know it's not the most environmentally friendly, but my lenses are really expensive. And so I just want it to be clean when it hits it. Go ahead, Mitchell.
Yeah, I forgot to mention, he also suggests put a UV filter on the front of your lens and save the trouble of scratching and dirt and impacts and things like that.
There's a lot of opinions about that. So we get into that with photographers of you'll spend, why spend $5,000 on a lens and then spend $50 on a piece of glass that sits in front of it, and whether that, it degrades the quality of the image. So I do keep a UV filter on my lens almost all the time. And when it matters, I take it off. So like as soon as I go, okay, I'm going to take a picture that I really care about, I take the UV on because I'm not going to shoot through an expensive lens and then into a cheap piece of glass. Next question.
Ronnie Hofsey in Tromsø, Norway asks, what software mixer can do auto mixing of 12 to 16 Dante inputs coming from goosenecks and also do some light 3 to 6 dB noise reduction built in or via plugins? Other automation options for use with Isadora is a big plus.
Mixbus might be able to do it. I'm not 100% sure. That's Harrison's software tool that does that. I am not sure how many software solutions would do the auto mixing. I mean, I just don't know where those, I guess, Mickey says Waves. Waves LV1 with a Dugan rack will do it. Yep. Right, Mickey's right there. So yeah, Waves will be the one that you could do your software. The other thing you can do with Dante, just note as if it's useful, is that Dante, Dugan makes a Dante box that'll do 64 channels of Dante. So you just send them out via Dante to the box, and you send them back, and it'll and you can group them. You can have them there, and it's not the most inexpensive box in the world, but it's like I think it's the same as all their other boxes. It's really funny. You can get an 8-channel like analog mixer from Dugan for $6,000, or you can get a 64-channel Dante. And I asked Dan one time, like, how come the price is the same? And he's like, well, the Dante one doesn't cost any more to make. so to him, it was like, that's what you do. So anyway, there is a separate box you can get that will just do all that auto mixing for as many channels as you would typically need. And because you can break them into groups, you can use that Dante box too. You could have a box on the network that can handle, let's say, 8 rooms of 8 people, and all be doing auto mixing within them. Now, next question.
Paul Wallace in Austin, Texas has a question. Several panelists have been testing out the Poly Studio P21 all-in-one monitor mic speaker webcam with the addition of a Melee tiny computer. Would this be the ideal kit to ship to guest panelists for a show? And how would you attach the Melee?
I wouldn't call it ideal. I think this is a good, I'm going to throw it in the office and be able to look at it if I need to, or I'm going to put something in. I wouldn't send this as a kit to anybody. Next question.
Douglas Carmichael. One negative comment about returning to office has been that the geographically distributed nature of modern workers makes the stronger collaboration in-person argument moot. Do you agree or disagree?
Go ahead, Courtney.
I disagree a little bit. I think getting together in person every now and then has a much more sense of camaraderie. It lets you see people in person, and you get to kibitz more without being, privately to people, without being publicly bringing something up in a group chat or something. So it gives you a little more ability to communicate privately and personally with your fellow team workers without necessarily, telling it to the world out there and letting it be available for, the higher ups to observe closely. So I think there's that level of communication that is lost if you're communicating over Zoom.
Go, John.
Yeah, it doesn't make it completely moot, but it can minimize it a little bit. The big difference is on site, you can run into people from other departments or in other teams you don't normally work with. I was walking through the office the other day and I stopped by and saw one of our directors in a totally different department that was working on something, and I offered to help because it was something that I had already built some materials for, and that just wouldn't have happened if I was at home.
Good, Chris.
So, according to John, working at the office means extra work for you. Interesting. So, I vote against that. No, it's interesting. We had an event last fall, and I met a woman that I had worked with through the entire pandemic. Met her at the beginning of the pandemic online on Zoom, and I'd never seen her face to face. And it's interesting because you can have a deep, meaningful camaraderie with somebody you work with online, and the chemistry may be totally different face to face, and it might be fine. It may not be. Back to the RTO. I thought RTO was rent to own. One of our clients just, like many other companies, just stated by October, everybody's back, minimum of 3 days a week. They told them what days they had to be there: Monday, Tuesday, and Thursday. Interesting. And each department has a certain percentage that they can give exemptions to. And they have a very specific and odd percentage. And people are already quitting.
Yeah, I mean, I think the problem that you have now is that it's funny. By the way, Chris, do you know why they do the Monday, Tuesday, Thursday? There's a couple companies doing that. It's so people don't do it. Everybody, when you say the manager can decide what 3 days, it's always Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. Like everybody is doing Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. And here, it's just like because then everyone gets
the George Jetson 3-day work week.
Well, and here's what happens. Some anecdotal evidence from people that I've talked to where companies do this. So when the companies force people to come back, the manager set it for Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday, and people do almost nothing on Monday and Friday. It's kind of a passive aggressive pushback of, they had to go in and, it's a real pain in the neck, and they just are, and they tend not to have a bunch of meetings on Mondays and Fridays. And, they tend to do some meetings so that it doesn't look like they're not doing anything, but they tend to slow down a lot. So rather than having a constant tension of them being online, when you give them 3 days, that people are mad, and the problem really is that you can talk about the camaraderie, but forcing people back is really what it does is it has them tune up their LinkedIn. They start getting those, and the problem is in their mind, they're thinking about their next job. And that's not where you want your employees. You want your employees to be in their mind thinking about your next product, thinking about the next thing that the clients want, thinking about how to do those things. And that's not what they're thinking when you force them to come back to the office. And the problem is that more and more companies are getting better and better at doing it online, which means they're taking the highest performance employees, who are the ones that are self-managed and really understand this stuff, and they're going to steal them. And they're already doing that. And there are companies, I've worked with companies that have been remote their entire existence. Like someone decided that was, and I will say that's very different than people who are used to being in the same room, because they have ways of doing everything. For instance, some of them keep their Zoom room, that their personal room is opened all the time. So anybody can just jump in to ask them. And if they don't want them to do that, they close it. But that tells people that's like shutting their door. And so if they want to be opened and everything else, people can just go in and talk to them if they need to. So there's a little bit of this, I got to talk to Chris for a second. and I just jump into Chris's room. Or sometimes they have shared Zoom rooms, and this used to be Hangouts before that. People will just jump in, and there's a room where everyone's sitting around with a window opened, and you can just sit there and talk to people as you need to. And we used to do that in Pixel Core because we had a DC office and we had a San Rafael office, and so we would keep them connected most of the day so that we could sit there and just ask questions and talk about things and as needed. The other thing that companies that are remote do is they do provide opportunities for workers to come in and work together. They don't have to do that, but hey, we're having a TGIF on Friday. So if you want to come in, to the office at 3:00, we're going to have sodas and snacks and beers and whatever else it is. And you can come in, and that way that people can mix and actually see each other. Then oftentimes what they do is regionally or quarterly, regionally they do monthlies or quarterlies, where people within a certain region are invited, everyone in that certain region are invited to come for an all hands just for that group. And then oftentimes every 6 months or every year, they literally fly everybody into a nice place. And I said, well, that seems really expensive. They're like, it's not as expensive as office space. They just did the math. They were like, it's a lot cheaper to bring people in every once in a while and have them all get together. And then they all have their own offices. And generally, they're all expected to have an office. Like, it's not like they're expected to not show up at client meetings with so one room in their house, the company is expecting them to have an office. And so the upside is that they get it, but the company pushes back. This is one company that I'm thinking about specifically, pushes back on if you cannot show up from your kitchen or your living room or anything else where something else is going on. They expect you to have a room in your house that you're going to use for that. That's the benefit of you getting to work at home but the other side of that is they need it to be professional. And if you don't want that, they have an office you can come into. It's not completely remote. Like, you could come in if you don't want to do that. They're not forcing you to do that. But if you want to stay home, you have to maintain a room that is a professional experience for their clients. And what happens is, and this company didn't start this in COVID. I mean, I think this company's been doing this for 20 years. It's not, everything's only gotten better. They said, well, it was all phone calls before that. And so to them, everything is just way better than it was before, because they started in the dark ages of just everybody on phone calls and everything else. And it just came down to the CEO never knew where they wanted to be. And so they didn't want an office because they just wanted to be everywhere. Go ahead, Chris.
It's quite interesting that, COVID happened right after, Salesforce built their tower. Apple just opened the spaceship. Schwab just built a huge campus in Texas. I think Elon now has corporate headquarters on Mars. I mean, it's interesting that all these companies just built these, and I'm sure there's many others.
And we've talked about this, ad nauseum, but the open office is just a disaster for every one of those
Absolutely.
little things. Like, hey, I bounced into somebody, and then there was something we came up with. There's 10 people talking around me or bugging me every time I'm trying to think. And so the thing is that the loss of productivity as a whole is way higher with people just constantly around you talking. Like, I it's a little piece of hell for me. So I've ridden a lot of desks and a lot of these things, and I just try to figure out, how do I not do this anymore? Typically, and so the free food is nice and all the other things are nice, but I don't want to ride a desk with a bunch of people shoulder to shoulder. And so, I think that companies could definitely get a huge part of their workforce to be happy and come back if they gave them a little bit more space, if they gave them a closed space that they could be in where they could actually work and they don't have to put their headphones on all the time. If there's a bunch of things that companies could do to draw people back in, but they don't want to spend the money on it. So now they're just trying to force them to, and it'll work for a little while, but it's not going to work in the long term because, again, the horse is out of the gate. Like, people are going to be working from their homes. They're going to be working remotely. There's no way to go back. And so companies will fight this for a little while. Same thing with physical events. I mean, there will be physical events, but they're never going to go back to the scale that they were. And those larger ones are going to keep on drawing out because they simply won't be able to compete as higher production tools become more prevalent. If you have more questions, you can go ahead and throw those into Mukana. So ask your questions now. We've got a little room before the end of the hour. Also, make sure to vote on those questions. It's really important. The voting tells us what order you want to. If you want to talk about more barbecue, then vote those barbecue ones up. You can vote if you want more technical ones, vote those up, and vote the ones down that you don't want us to talk about. So just decide what you want to do there. But as producers, you have control. Next question.
Javier Alfaro from Mexico City, Mexico, asking, what is the best AI tool or plugin for taking notes and documenting Zoom meetings?
Go ahead, Courtney.
I used to use Google Keep, but they've deprecated that in the as a plugin for the browser. It still works. Whether or not they'll continue to support it is questionable. They are moving everybody to the apps that run on Android and iOS for Google Keep. And it's good for keeping notes. Now, I don't think there's any AI involved in it. So if you're looking for something that has AI tools, I've been using Perplexity as a plugin for a Google Chrome, and that works pretty well if you need to use it for AI composition and generative text. That's good. Maybe you can find, there's a very good site called Future Tools. I think Preto has spoken of this before. Matt Wolf runs it. And you can go there, and it is a collection of all things AI tools and software available. And he updates it on a daily basis. So you can just search for anything that fits in the category that you're looking for at Future Tools. So just do a search for that.
Yeah, and there's a lot like on the Mac. There's now Mac Whisper, or there's the Whisper in general that can transcribe everything that you did there, and then it's just a matter of putting it into an AI tool to summarize it, break it down to the points, and so on and so forth. And I think that you'll see those tools get infinitely better over time. And I believe that Zoom has some of its own AI tools as well, which I haven't gotten to experiment a fair bit, but it does. There's a lot of things that it'll do, like shorten. I'm talking to someone about it. You can shorten things. Like I can write a long email and say, make this shorter, and it'll just make it shorter. And oftentimes it's more pithy, and so sometimes that works. Next question.
Paul Wallace is back from Austin, Texas, asking, have you tried Vimeo's new AI-powered tools?
I have not tried Vimeo's AI-powered tools. In fact, I didn't even know that Vimeo had AI-powered tools. So I think that we should probably. I know that some of the folks at Vimeo watch the show. So if you're watching the show from Vimeo, we'd love to have you on. You can talk about your tools. So anyway, it's an open invitation for folks from Vimeo to come on because we'd love to talk about it. Go ahead, Courtney.
I just had a flash on that question that AI powered tools. If I could get a jigsaw that could cut a perfect circle, if you just hit a button on it, that would be perfect, wouldn't it?
They make those, Courtney.
Artificial intelligence controlled. Or you just tell it, cut out a chair back for me. Okay.
Yeah, this is, I think that what it is, there's a scripting, you can it's adding basically ChatGPT solutions to Vimeo. I'm just looking at it while we were talking. So you can prompt it and say, give me a bunch of examples of something. You can also ask it to, you can give me a bunch of examples for something. You can also ask it to write a script for you. This is the information I want you to write a script. You can have it transcribe things. And so those are the things, some of the tools that they have there. Go ahead, Chris.
I think it's important to remember that a lot of people are using AI or AI powered as marketing. Like if I'm not saying it, I'm not relevant, right? And so a lot of times when you see that stuff, you have to throw it out. You have to ignore it.
Now with AI.
But I will say this, very interesting. I was just telling John this. I've been using the speech to text thing on my phone a lot more lately. And I've noticed times where I'm talking and it misunderstands me and it writes the wrong word. And then I write 3 or 4 or 5 more, or I say 3 or 5 more words, and it goes, oh, I bet you meant this.
Yeah, it'll go back and correct it. It's contextual.
It's fascinating.
Yeah, it's contextual. So as soon as it knows where you were going, it'll go back and correct you have to keep talking. It's one of those things that you think that you're doing voice, but it's really machine language, that's machine learning that is going there. Yeah. So if you keep on talking, you'll see it. And then Google will do that a lot. Like if you watch the Google captioning on a Meet and you open that up, you'll see it constantly changing the words because as it contextually understands it, it understands what you actually meant.
One of these days, we're going to have computers where you just ask it to draw you something and it will.
If we did that, I would call it something like a journey, like you're in the middle of a journey. Like I think that would be like you're in a mid-journey.
Was that you who posted the balloon monster walking on the beach? Was that yours?
Yeah, that was. Someone asked for a video version, and I just made a mid-journey version. I don't do the video stuff much anymore.
That's pretty funny.
They are. It's it's endless fun. The one that is now, I was going to show it today, but it's not quite. I'm not facile with it yet. Is the new generative AI with Photoshop? What you can do is just take a marker, like a paintbrush, really big, and just paint where you want the river, where you want the land, where you want some trees, and then you just select it and say valley with trees and a river, and it will just build a video. It'll build a photorealistic thing of what you just kind of laid out, and then you go. And then I went back and I painted another little stream in that went to it, and I did it again, and it just had a little stream, but it all just integrated the whole thing into it. And so it will, so when it comes to like blocking idea, where we're getting to, and again, I don't think we're going to use these in production as much as we are going to use them when we're talking about previs. Oh man, like being able to sit there and block out, I want a person here, person here, person here, person here, and then I can say, I want this feel for this, and I want this whatever, and I want this person, and a man talking to a woman, and they're getting to with Midjourney. They have that blocking, and I just saw it go by today or last night or whatever, where you can kind of build a stick version of they had a stick version of a blonde woman in a pink dress, holding a box basically. And then they uploaded that to Midjourney and said, Margot Robbie holding a hamburger, and there it was. Yeah, go ahead, Mitchell.
What would Bob Ross say to all this? That's what I want to know.
I think that there is. I'm not obviously I'm not that afraid of it. I mean, I enjoy using it a lot to figure stuff out and to block things out and so on and so forth. But it's like you can get people to cook stuff for you, but there's a certain value in making something or cooking something that you did that or you worked on it. And I think people are going to find more and more that they still want to do those things. Well, I think why people sometimes feel disconnected is because they're not doing anything anymore. They open up their food in boxes and they have someone deliver something and they're not, there's something about the doingness, the interaction with the world that makes it valuable and makes it enjoyable. And so I think that, I think people are going to come more back to that as more and more stuff is done for them. Next question.
And it's Douglas Carmichael asking, when a landlord won't let you run Ethernet in the walls, what flat Cat 5 be a good second choice?
Go ahead, Mitchell.
I've done it before, run it under carpet and things like that, but you have a long-term issue with that because people walk on it and you don't walk on Ethernet. So I'm more inclined to just do it and ask for forgiveness after the fact rather than permission.
Go ahead, Courtney. That's how you don't get your deposit back.
That's how you lose your deposit.
That's the cost of running Ethernet.
Yeah,
One
exactly.
security
That's
deposit.
the cost. Yeah, exactly. Go ahead,
Yeah, the
Courtney.
problem with you can get flat Cat 6, Cat 5. Here's something that's pretty cheap for like $10 for 25 feet with the connectors on the end of it. You can run it along walls, but the problem you run into with if you've ever tried to run flat cable flush against a wall or something, making any kind of a turn is really problematic. If you've got to make a 45-degree bend in it or something, it's going to stick out. You can't fold it very easily. You've got to go up and over a door and back down. You're going to run into problems making right-angle turns with it. It's not very easy to route. With a round cable, you just make the right-angle turn and come down. Doesn't matter. But flat cables don't make right-angle turns very easily.
Yeah, another thing you might want to look at is Monoprice has a thing called Slim Runs, Cat 6s, and they may not be the fastest. I think that they might be 100, and they might be 1 gig. I think you can get gig versions of them, I think, but they're not going to go any higher than that. They are about as thick as the flat run that you were going to do, maybe just a little thicker, but they're round, and they go around things, and we use them a lot. We don't use them for very long runs. We mostly use them in our kits because it reduces weight and clutter. But these little Slim Runs do a pretty good job, and you can get longer ones. They just don't go very long, very effectively. I think 50 feet is kind of the outer range. And I'm trying to look at what they're. I know that we've had some that have only been 100 megs, which didn't matter because we usually use them for control and audio and stuff like that. So it just depends on what the speeds are that you need. But anyway, these are Cat 6. I'm trying to look at 10. Well, they say they're 10 Gs. These are Slim Runs. Anyway, so I would take a look at those. Those work quite nicely for the kind of thing that you're doing without having to do flat ones, which have all the problems that Courtney said. Next question.
Rob Collins in Raymore, Missouri. What's a good grippy tape I can get to stop things from sliding around my desk?
Go ahead, Mitchell.
Anything with the word gorilla in it will work.
Yeah, I was going to say. I mean, you didn't say you had to. It couldn't do any damage, So I mean, duct tape and gorilla tape and Loctite. Those all will work. I mean, nothing's going to slide anywhere once you do that. Go ahead, Courtney.
Or E6000 cement or silicone. What I do is if I have something that I want to, have a grippy bottom on it, but I don't want it to be glued to the desk, is I put a very thin coating of silicone, GE silicone on the bottom of it, just a wafer thin, and let it dry. And then when you set it down, it cushions it, and that cup or whatever it is won't move because it has a grippy bottom on it then. And it usually will stick pretty good to the clean off whatever you're going to coat with this stuff with alcohol before you put it on to make sure you get the grease off of it. That works pretty good for me.
Good, Chris.
Alex, when you were dreaming about your custom desk, I had asked you once, did you want a hard surface or a soft surface? And I would go for something soft. But also, Rob, if you have stuff sliding around on your desk, I would recommend taking the corners a little slower.
Yeah, I was like, get it off the boat. I mean, that's all I'm saying is, it's
You just got to slow down just a little bit. You can control most stuff that way.
Next question.
Paul Wallace from Austin, Texas. Discuss how Discord uses localized time post and how you'll always be on time if you have your computer clock set to the right time. Do Zoom and Mukana do something similar?
Well, it obviously didn't work yesterday because Paul was giving us a time for a meeting that wasn't the right one. So my view of Discord time now is, I didn't think about it before. Is like, I don't know if it works or not. So I actually don't know how Discord. I think it looks at your local time of where you're posting it, but it didn't work yesterday. So I think it was used for one of our meetings, and some people made it and some people didn't. So I think that I'm not sure. We'll have to come back to you on that one. Now, next question.
And it's from Eduardo Augustine in Panama. Eduardo wants to know, I'm considering getting 2 pan-tilt zoom cameras for my fly kit, which have 30x optical zoom. We'll be working on funerals, conferences, and some sport events. What is a good pan-tilt zoom cam without breaking the bank?
In the sub $5,000 range, I think Bird Dog has a lot of really good tools. I mean, I would definitely take a look at those. Some people will go towards the PTZ optics, but I haven't had a great Vadio is another one, and I haven't had a great experience with either one of those. And so I think the Bird Dogs would be probably where I'd probably start to look. In the mid range, in the kind of the mid 5,000s, you probably want to look at some of the Canon lens. The Canon solutions are pretty great in those areas there. And then in the 10,000 a camera range, for the long zooms, you probably want to look at the Panasonic 150s. There's the 120s and the 150s, but the 150s are considerably better than the 120s. And so that's going to give you that long range. Of course, in a shorter range, then you might want to look at the Sony FR7s. That's what we've been using those for a lot of events, and we're really, really happy with them from a closer area. The thing to remember also when you have PTZs is you can get closer. So a lot of times we use PTZs specifically because we can put them very close to the stage, which is going to give you a much better experience than putting them at the back of the room. And so a lot of times pillars turn out to be useful. We will take PTZ stands. You can get these that are designed to go to the wall. Like you can install them on a wall, but what we found is we can strap them really tightly to a pillar. So we strap them to pillars and then put our PTZs on them, and they're on the inside of the pillar. And that's, so the reason that this is important is if you think about you might have a stage like this that's out here like this, and you have a pillar here and a pillar here, and then you have lots of seats going along here. What you can do is you can, basically strap your PTZs to the inside of these pillars. And what that means is that the seat kills behind it never are affected because you have the same number of seat kills as you had before. And so you can put those PTZs a lot closer, and we've done that a lot, and it's super useful. Next question.
From Gordon Lake in Los Angeles, California, Gordon asked, I have Mix Effect Pro on an iPad. Would I need to put it on a Mac Mini in order for a remote TD to control it, or can they control the iPad? And what about putting a Stream Deck in the mix?
Yeah, you're gonna need a Mac Mini to do that. You can't control the iPads are built to not be controlled remotely. so I think you'll have a lot of trouble with that. But the Mac Mini, we use it with a Mac Mini and it works great. And that's going to open you up to the whole world of shortcuts and Stream Decks, and all those things are possible once you go into that path. Go ahead, Mitchell.
Yeah, the M1 Mac Mini works wonders. And yes, the Stream Deck with the Mix Effect companion plugins is a wonderful thing.
Yeah, absolutely. Next question.
Kenny Hampton in Greenville, Illinois. Looking at some B&H daily sales, I see light panels, Gemini LED panels, 25 by 13 times 7. The list price comes in at approximately $4,500. What are the advantages of such a panel versus lesser priced units?
Go ahead, Courtney.
Well, they're more sturdily made. Light Panels is one of the first companies to do LED lights for production use. And so they, are priced pretty high because they were one of the first, and they're maintaining their profit margin. And they're pretty tough. They're really designed for professional use, to throw on a truck, pull them off the truck every day without having to pamper them too much. The quality of the light you're going to get probably could be duplicated in something that's about a third of that cost or less. But it may not last as long. Of course, you can afford to buy 3 or 4 of them, and as they break, you can retire them and bring out a new one. So it's a trade-off.
Go ahead, Mitchell.
Yeah, I agree with Courtney. Light panel are great. I've got one right there. It's a Astra soft, and it's $2,000.
Yeah, and the other ones that we've seen a lot showing up are Nan Lux. So a lot of us have Nan lights. I didn't even know Nan Lux existed until I was talking to somebody. We were talking to someone who was coming to light one of our shows, and they're like, "Oh, yeah, I'm going to use these big Nan Luxes." I was like, "What are Nan Luxes?" And I did a search, and it's just made by the same company as Nan Light. It's just the next level up, and they have a lot of great ones that are pretty. It's cost effective for what they are, which is at another grade above what the Nan Lights are. Now, next question.
Next question in from Paul Wallace in Austin, Texas. What time is the show training workshop on Tuesday today?
Go ahead, Mitchell.
We have moved to 3 p.m. Eastern. Sorry. So that means it's 12 o'clock your time.
It's earlier now, because I just told a bunch of people that it was at 3 p.m. Pacific Standard.
Yeah, now
yesterday.
The question is it this week that the new time goes into effect or next week? And somebody's going to have to chime in and tell us that. But yes, it's going earlier for our European friends.
Oh, I was trying to figure out. Why are we going earlier? Like, why are we changing it? Usually, the thing you're always doing. So, but that totally makes sense. Let's go to the next question.
Paul Wallace again from Austin, Texas. What's the Apple product you most want to get into the current offerings, and what are you hoping for from Apple the most?
What I'm interested to see what happens in the fall when it comes to the iPhone is whether the iPhone will be 3D, stereo capable. So that's the thing that I'm particularly interested in related to that, is to know whether, because I think that as we go on this path, like, how are you going to generate the Vision headsets will of course produce they'll do their own stereo, but wouldn't it be great if everybody who has a phone, the 75 million phones that get bought or the 200 million phones that get sold or whatever, can do stereo for those headsets? I think that's coming in this version or the next release. It feels pretty silly to announce the Vision and not have the phone be able to do stereo for it this year, but it would feel more silly next year. So I think, because then there'll be a whole bunch of headsets there. So it'll be interesting to see if Apple coordinates the phone offerings with what's going on with the headset. So we'll see. Next question.
Eduardo Augustine in Panama. What is your best approach to getting new clients for performing live streaming services?
I think that the biggest thing is to do live streaming services. So you have to be out there doing them. So I think that a lot of times how I got started with almost all the things that I did is I just started doing it with whoever I could. Sometimes it didn't make any money. Sometimes it didn't make much money. And I, started to kind of work through it. It allowed me to figure out how to get it done, what the problems were going to be. And it allowed me to figure it out. If you wait for people to hire you to do it, might take a long time, and usually people like me will get that work first. So we'll drink your milkshake. So you just have to, like, a lot of times I'm out there. Usually I end up in the more expensive realm of doing those things, but it usually starts with just trying to figure it out. And you'll see me do that a lot with a lot of different things of trying to figure out how to do it, and I don't know how to do it, and so let's figure it out before we start trying to charge for it. Next question.
From Gordon Lake in Los Angeles asking, at what point in the growth of a digital first operation do you need to bring on board an EIC, an engineer in charge? What would be their minimum qualifications and where would you go to find one?
Once you start having multiple cameras, I start thinking, once you have multiple cameras for a client that is remotely important, we start thinking about an EIC. Now that EIC may also be the TD, maybe someone else there, but we really have someone that we think of as an EIC. It starts to separate once you're getting to 3 or 4 cameras and a separate audio pipeline and some comms. You really need to have somebody who's only focused on that. They're not doing anything else. Go ahead, Chris.
Yeah, Alex, you always talk about, you don't want to put people over like 40% or 60% of their, amount of things that they can do in any given hour or day. And I think that you have, at a certain point, and it's hard, that I understand that's the question, but you have to decide, the system becomes complex enough that one person has to know the overview, and that person can't be doing too much stuff. So you don't want to have the guy who's sitting there cutting a show be the EIC, because if something goes down, then this part of the job doesn't happen while something is getting fixed.
Yeah, cascading failures is what really kills a lot of live shows. Is basically something went wrong and someone pays attention to that and other things go wrong while they're paying attention to it. And so that's when every time you hire enough people for a given division, you're compartmentalizing that, you're protecting it by saying, I've got enough people to pay attention to just that. A lot of times, we have with Pixel Core, we had EICs, but we also had most of our PAs were pretty technical. Like they were pretty technical PAs because they in smaller events, they might be the TD or a camera operator. In the bigger events, they were PAs. And what it meant was there was an incredible incredible ability to flex when things went wrong, because there's a lot of people that knew how the process worked. And so I think that's definitely something to keep in mind. Next question.
Paul Wallace from Austin, Texas asking, what's your power strip of choice that has USB, USB-C, and AC, etc.?
USB-C. Get the most power out of it. That's the one I usually choose if I can. A couple quick announcements before we go to the second hour. Tomorrow we're going to talk about comms architecture, not specific comms, but comms architecture. Why we build comms and what they look like and what's important and what's a PL and what's a direct and cloud comms versus, but again, not specific brands, but really just how we approach comms. Thursday, Brad Woodall is in. Brad works on, I don't think we can, he is the technical director for Thursday Night Football. so I don't know if I can say that or not. So he's going to be talking about cutting shows. So we're pretty excited about that, having Brad on. So if you have questions, that's going to be an incredible Thursday. Friday, we're the world of DMX lighting. So we're going to talk all about how DMX works and how it integrates with lights. So stay tuned for that. And finally, on Saturday, of course, we're going to continue our accessibility. We're really excited about it. It's turning out really well. So we are going to talk about mobility issues this week. And we talked about language interpretation. We had an introduction the week before, and we're doing it with ASL, which is really, really interesting. And we've had a mixed panel. So some of the panel have been deaf. Some of them have been low sight. Some of them have been, there's been a lot of different things, and figuring out how to, it's a lab as much as a show. And so it's really been powerful for me. So hopefully you'll join us on Saturday morning as well. All right, we are now changing subjects to our second hour and talking a little bit about broadcast and as it relates to, and how to build graphics with broadcast. I think a lot of times people get overwhelmed with, now I have to learn After Effects, or now I have to learn, how to animate those things. When in reality, when you're just getting started, those tools are useful, whether you're using After Effects or Motion, Cinema 4D, all the tools that are used by a lot of folks to put these together. But you can get away with some more basic tools. And so I thought it'd be useful for us to talk about some of those and answer some of your questions. I'll show you a couple quick examples of that, just to kind of give you a thought of what might be possible. And hopefully this demo will work, because I didn't rehearse it very much. So let's see here. If I So what I want to do is I'm going to put this down here like that. All right. And so the first thing to think about is one of the things that you can do is think about countdown clocks. So the very first thing is, like, I build a lot of countdown clocks. And, you know, one of the things that's here, this is a presentation, but it's a presentation with a countdown clock. And it's all Mid-Journey stuff. So, but you have that countdown clock there. But what's cool is that all I did was render out the countdown clock. So I have the countdown clock as its own little layer. I rendered it out with an alpha channel, so it just drops in wherever I want. And if I want to go, you know, this is like one countdown clock, but if I want to put it somewhere else or even move it, I can have it be somewhere else. And now it's a different, you know, it's a countdown clock here. One thing, by the way, is interesting here is notice how I changed frames and it kept counting. Like last night when I was prepping this, I was like, Keynote is keeping track of the fact that I'm doing this. So it'll just keep moving it. It just keeps counting as it moves over. So these are all, so what you're seeing here is the ability to have these countdown clocks show up wherever you want them to. And it's a really, you know, being able to have just one little video. So you can have a bunch of countdown clocks. You don't have to render it all out. You don't have to figure out where it goes. The client can give you a frame that they want, and you can simply move that countdown clock in. Now, there's a lot of countdown clock tools, but one of the reasons that I want to talk about here was because a lot of times those tools are very, they're not very, they're very like, this is the way we're going to do a countdown clock. What I'm just showing you there is I can have a series of countdown clocks, like a bunch of different fonts, and I can, that are rendered out. I render them out of Motion. You can do them out of After Effects, Cinema 4D, whatever you want. They're just little movies, and I just put them over, I just move them around and scale them to where I want them in the frame. And then I have something that looks really, really nice and customized for that show in a way that's much nicer than just, and it takes nothing to render. And by the way, the movies are 1 frame a second or 2 frames a second, something like, you know, they're very small movies because they don't, Keynote doesn't care, you know, what that looks like. Now, another thing you may want to do is things like lower thirds. Let's see if I turn this on. I'm going to make sure I'm in the right computer. There we go. So, so here's a lower third that I have here. So that was done. If you look at it here, I'll go back again. This is all done this is simply done with a draw on. I'll show you in a second. But this is all done, and you got some transparency there. You've got, so it doesn't have to be something that is, you know, all blocked out and so on and so forth. And it's got a little bit of an animation to it. When I want it to go away, I'm going to hit another button and it's going to draw itself out. That does not take very long. I'll show it to you in a second. But it is a very, very easy little animation. But I'll do it one more time just so you can see it there. So, but this is like a little lower third, and then it pops up, and then I can simply drop it out and play it out again. And that is not something you have to have any technical skill at all to put together. And I'll show you what that looks like here in just a second. The last one I was going to show you is you can also do little animations that sit over top of you. So something to think about here is I can have, for instance, I can have something like jump into the frame here. I can have it wiggle a little bit. I can even fire something out of my little cannon, and then I can have it jump off a frame. And again, that's all comped over top of me. And so one thing to think about is as you start to do those, you can have your presentation doesn't have to be contained to a just lower thirds. Anything you want, little animations that are popping up. A lot of times we try to figure out where I can talk, and where am I going to put my head. Well, in some cases, I do presentations where there is no screen. Like literally, things are just popping up around me, and I can talk about those things. And those things are all just simply, I'm just copying them over top of me. And again, everything I just showed you is just me just playing a Keynote document. You know, like there's not any, you know, I didn't do any animation. And when I want to change it, it's a lot faster than hitting render, you know, in After Effects or Motion, and then putting it back in my playout system and then doing other things like that. And it doesn't require a lot of technical skill. So let's go back a little bit, and let's see if I can get back to my my animation here. I'm on the wrong keyboard. There we go. Oops, there we go. That's me keyed over it.
That's funny.
Yeah. All right, so let's look at this one here. So one of the things you want to look at here is if I grab onto my switcher. So one of the things that's happening here is, let me fill this up here real quickly here. Oop, hold on. Sorry, this is sorry, hold on a second. This is, it goes back into, I still need to have more computers to do this. All right. So let me cut back to this. So here's my switcher here. And what you can see, what I'm looking for here is that this, what you're seeing, this lower third is this guy right here. So it's this on air that's there. So if I go in here and turn that off, you'll see that's my second key. This is my first key, right? So now what I'm going to do is you'll see me scroll down, and what I'm looking at is the key 2 that's there. And so how I affect, what is transparent or not is here within my clip-in gain. So I can sit here and move exactly, so I'm basically, now see how when the image gets darker, that means that Luma key is starting to, cut into the actual image. So you want to make sure you don't get to there, but I can lower that opacity, but I can only go as far as that dark area there. And then the gain here is going to increase that. The gain is going to increase the contrast. So I can open up, and again, I'll get to a point where I can, so what you're going to do is start to play with it. Now, the more separation that you have in that foreground and background, the better it's going to, the better it's going to look. But that's all I'm doing here is I turn pre-multiply off, and I'm using the camera, the input from my Keynote in both as both the key source and as the fill source, so that I can make those adjustments inside of the key, the clip and the gain. And so I can make that work. And if I cut back to it, you'll see that there's, there it is there, and I can still play with, I can be looking at it and going, oh, I want to, play with exactly, how clear that is. But that's where I'm just simply moving. In that case, I'm moving the clip of where that center point is, and how I want it to sit. And then I can play with the gain where I can, make it, I don't know why I would do that, but I can kind of stretch it out. So I can play with that semi-transparency. And it's still a pretty soft gradient. I don't know how it looks on Zoom, but, uncompressed, it looks, so it's still, it's not, I think a lot of people think if they use a presentation tool, they can't use they're not going to be able to use have it, it's going to have to be opaque, and it doesn't have to be opaque. And so we'll go ahead and draw that back out again. And so I think that the goal here is just to kind of illustrate that there's a lot of opportunity here for you to use it, even if you want to add some graphics here. Now, a couple of other things we'll talk, there's some other questions that are kind of come up that'll help us illustrate some of the other bits and pieces. But you can also render, what I will say is you can render with Keynote, you can render out, frames with alpha channels. You can go basically render Apple ProRes 4444. So now you can send it out to a playout system if you do want to play it out later. Go ahead, Mitchell.
Yeah, it's interesting because there's a huge number of workflows to make all of this happen. And, it's good to mention Keynote, Motion, and those, but also there's some purpose-built programs like SPX from Tuomo, John Barker's.
Yeah, so you're absolutely right. But specifically what I think a lot of times those are something that takes a little bit more of a lift to set up. So today what we're really talking about is just that to get started, you don't need any other specific built tool. You can literally take your presentation tool. I mean, that's the point of today. To talk about, we talked about SPX last week. We'll talk about After Effects another time.
And the other thing is, I'm sorry, but I use After Effects a lot, and I'm pretty quick with it. Sometimes it's easier to use your old friend, After Effects, using essential graphics inside of After Effects to get it out.
Right. The point is for today is that you can. I don't use Keynote on a daily basis to do computer graphics. This is for folks who are like thinking about how to use graphics in there, and they don't know how to use any of those apps, and they don't want to pay $50 a month, and they don't know, they're not technically ready. They just want to throw a couple things into their, if you have a presentation that you want to do that has those, if you have a class that you want to, give, I think that what people underestimate is how much they can actually get done with the presentation tool. It's not a replacement for those tools. It's simply it's simply another way to do that. Yeah, go ahead, John.
Yeah, I would go ahead and also say that everyone has access to a free tool that does this. Even Google Slides can do the very basics of these things, though Keynote and PowerPoint are both better. And almost everyone has a license for either Keynote or PowerPoint. Alex, a question for you on it was a little cannon, I think, that came and animated through. Was that using an SVG?
No, that was
Okay.
using, let me go back to that. That was, let me turn.
Because I thought you had
back
ungrouped it and then pulled out the bullet and animated
No,
the bullet separately.
I didn't do anything nearly that complicated. Let me let's see. So we have so this guy came in, bounced in here, and then I made him wiggle a little bit, and then I fired that out there. Now what all of that is. Let's see here if I can pull this over.
You just had a little circle behind it.
Yeah,
and
yeah. It just
Nice.
appeared. Yeah, it's. Here, let me pull this up so you can see it. So you can see what that animation actually looked like. And the reason that the reason I showed that specifically is that this is, I think a lot of people don't understand how much animation you can actually put into your presentation tool and have it actually work. So let me turn that key off. Let's see here. Hold on. I have in case you're wondering, I have a lot of screens at the moment here. I'll turn that off here. And then we'll go back to this, and then and even though I have a lot of screens, I need more. All right. So here we go. Here's the animation, and so if I look at my build order, let me grab that. So I have the build order is where a lot of the work gets done. So when you're building at least in Keynote, really getting into specifics about your build order is really important. So this is just a shape I grabbed. If you go into here, I don't know where I grabbed it from somewhere in here. Let's see, maybe it's under science. I literally scrolled and just said, "Oh, that looks good." And so, I don't know where I grabbed. I don't know where I grabbed it. So anyway, I grabbed the file out of here, and I gave it bouncy. So if I look at the preview for bouncy, it bounces in, and it has motion blur, and I don't know if everybody has motion blur, but Keynote does. And then I gave it a jiggle, and I said preview there, and then I had a little oval, and I said I want you to appear, and then you'll notice that I've grouped these together. So I've said this is a build right after 3, and with no delay, and I want this one to go right after build 4 with and this is the scale. And so, which means you don't see it. This is actually not going to work because it will. I think you didn't actually even see that motion. And then I have this bouncy. So this is the, that's the bounce off. That's just pre-canned. I didn't do any animation to do that. In here, you can see this is if I I've selected this movement. And if I grab onto the move, you'll see my arc here. So if I want to change my arc, I can simply, grab this and just make it, I want it to arc a little bit less. I want it to play, a little bit more like this, all of that stuff. And if I was doing this somewhere else, I probably, again, in any kind of post piece, I would probably have to re-render it. But in this case, I just hit preview and it just goes, boom. Now I get to look at it again. And so all of those things are done pretty quickly. So you can throw little things together like this. Again, if you are, and if you look at, if we want to go back a little bit to, this animation, you'll see that this animation is similar in the sense that it says, okay, I want to do what's called a line draw, which is going to draw that line around it and bring it in. And then I want this to be a keyboard, and I want this to be a pop. And in each one of those, I'm setting delays. So you'll see down here, this is the delay. And so I'm saying I want this to come after that at a certain pace. So I don't have to key everything that's happening or start everything that's happening. I simply just hit go, and it's just going to do that whole section. Then I hit go again, and it's going to do the section out again. And again, I can key that out. I can also, if I go into my, let's see if I can pull this over. When I export, so I can do this, but I can also do a export of a movie, and you'll see that my movie here, I can say I want the playback to be self-playing. I want to use all the slides, or I could just use a single slide. I can set my resolution here. I can also do things like say custom, and when I go into custom, I can start setting my frame rate. So I can go up to 59. I can literally I have 2997, 5994 on Keynote. I don't think the other ones have that. So that's really built for broadcast in that sense. Or I can do 60 frames a second. I can also say what my resolution is. So I can say this is 1920 by 1080. I can make it any resolution I want. But here's the interesting thing is I can also go, I want to do Apple ProRes 444, and I want to export with transparent backgrounds. So there I can start to, so now I have the ability to not only, I can export it out to something else that I want to play out in, and it's going to put all the frames I want into it with the transparency, with alpha channels and so on and so forth. So anyway, that's what's kind of sitting inside that document, which is, I think a lot of people don't, for a long time, I didn't know that existed. Let's go ahead and jump into the next question.
David Brady from New York asking, when trying to create motion graphics for Air using presentation tools, is it better to render out a video file with transparency or play out direct? And how do you compensate for the dreaded progressive versus interlace motion blur?
Yeah, so what I just showed there, what you want to do is if you have a playout system, use the playout system. It is going to be better than a presentation tool. So you shouldn't replace one or the other. But if you look back here with what I showed, what you want to do to get rid of the interlace or to deal with the interlace is you'll set, let's say you're doing a 30 frame per second interlace, which is essentially 5994 fields. Render these out as progressive. So typically what you would do is render this out as a 5994, and then you will take that into something like compressor and have it take your 5994 footage and output it at 2997 interlace or 5994 interlace, depending on how it says it. And what you're going to get back out are the fields in their correct order. So you want to render all the fields as progressive and then recompress them as interlace. And you should be able to get rid of having some issues with your interlace motion blur. If that's what, if you're trying to render out so that it'll feed into an interlace system. Go ahead, John.
Yeah. And I was just looking, Alex, PowerPoint can also export to ProRes, but it doesn't have near as many options. One reason you might not want to do that is if you are using Magic Move or Morph, and you want your to be able to jump from slide to slide and have your animations animate based on what you were just at. So if you want to go from slide 1 to slide 7, if you export that as a video, you're never going to be able to make that jump without making a custom 1 to 7 video. Whereas if you have it live in your presentation tool, it's a little bit more dynamic.
Yeah, absolutely. And the tools have gotten a lot better. A lot of times we've worried in the past with the M series, I found that the playback is a lot better. Oftentimes we would see a couple frame losses here and there with a presentation tool, and I've seen none of that, since we moved to the M series. So I think that it has gotten a lot more stable than it has been in the past to make that actually work. So, but yeah, I will say of all the presentation tools, if you're going to do what I'm talking about, and you have a Mac, you can definitely do some of the stuff on slides and PowerPoint. But if you have a Mac, I'd highly recommend Keynote for this because it definitely has the most tools for broadcast. Next question.
Andy Kokendorfer from Viera, Florida asks, which sites do you view for ideas on video graphic design?
I mostly, when I'm looking for ideas, I'm mostly looking at some YouTube, some folks that are, doing things with YouTube. Sometimes I'll look at those as options. Freya Homer does some really great animations that I pay a lot of attention to. And 2 blue, 3 green, or 3 green, 2 blue does a lot of great math animations that I really enjoy. When it comes, for educational graphics, when it comes to actual design, I mostly watch TV. So I think that Thursday and Sunday Night Football are things that I probably pay the most attention to as far as what kind of graphics that they're using. But I look at a lot of different things. I collect a lot of things of sweepers and all kinds of other bits and pieces that are there. So I think that the best thing to do is take the graphics that you like the most and try to break them down. When I was first getting into animation, I spent a large portion of my day just rebuilding other people's animations. I would just look at something on TV and I would try to build it exactly the same way that they did, and I would just copy it, not because I was going to show it to anyone or I was going to try to sell it, but I felt like I need to know that I can do what they can do. And it would take me sometimes weeks to do something that was a couple seconds long on CNN or it was a very complex. Oftentimes I didn't realize how complex. I was like, oh, that'll be easy. And then as I put it together, I was like, oh, that's really hard. And I didn't, but I learned a lot, and that's how I got my first, animation work did use those for my demo reels, because I would change a couple of the details and so on and so forth and move it around. Like once I knew how to do it, I'd make it look different, and then I'd put it in a demo reel. And so I got my first jobs, and then I backfilled my demo reel with the stuff I was doing for actual broadcasters. Next question.
Jason Robertshaw from Sarasota, Florida. End credits on live events. Do you use them? And if so, how do you generate and maintain them? Are they animated or static?
Go ahead, John.
If I was animating an end credits, I would do one of two things. I would either scroll the text, and that'd be easy with a single text box that's really, really long with all the information you need. Start it at the bottom of the page and have it do a linear move up. You can do a magic move or just a line animation. Or what I would do is create different image or different slides I want that are laid out how I want, especially if you want to add additional graphics. And again, use magic move or morph. I would morph it by character so that the text can break apart and reform itself. It would be a nice animation that's super simple to put together.
Go ahead, Mitchell.
Yeah, if I was generating a credit roll, very few software can deal with it because it will be jumpy. If you do it in After Effects, sorry to mention it again, I would generate it there and then bring it out as a ProRes file, which I can bring into something else. But in After Effects, there are ways you can deal with the motion blur and the framing issue. Because what it is that it's not sitting on exactly the right frame as it's moving up. I use an expression to calculate how to get to the right and exact frame.
Yeah, I think that I rarely do credits. We have credits for this show, but someone else did it. I think that I try to think about, and if I do them, usually my credits are really simple because I often think about, am I doing the credits for the people that worked on the show, or am I doing the credits for the people who are watching the show? And most of my energy is all spent on people watching the show. And so I usually just kind of put things up like, people want to have their name up there if they're on the team and they want that there. Most of the shows that I work on, we technically didn't exist. Of course, it was it all just happened by accident. So most of the shows that I work on, we don't have any credits, and I'm usually generally uncomfortable with my own name in credits. So I don't prefer to have my name on anything. My most known credit is innocent bystander. If someone says I have to have one, go ahead, Courtney.
If you're doing a live show, end credits for a live show, you might want to have some ability to change their scroll rate on the fly, because if you've got to hit a hard out time, like for a network, Chiron has all these things built in where you can tell it, you've got 12 seconds and it'll roll the credits in that amount of time. Because a lot of times there are legal requirements that some people have to receive a credit. And even though they scroll by very quickly, that satisfies that legal requirement. Right. And if you just cut them off short, they would, violate their contract. So you got to take that into account if you're doing something with make sure you're not going to short shrift someone's legal rights by cutting off the credits.
Yeah, usually those are for broadcast, but I mean, I've never seen a live event that I worked on that there was any legal requirement for us to put them in. And I don't, but for broadcast, you're absolutely right. There's oftentimes that, and that's why you see them scroll by so fast. Like they just kind of go, okay, we don't, we're not getting paid for this, so that goes by really fast. And now most of our streaming services just give us a button to go to the next show. So it's not, those reasons are part of why I don't spend a ton of time trying to figure it out. Next question.
John Nichols from Concord, California asking, I'm working with slides. They're transparent. Everything is black. I don't see the edges of the slide, so I can't judge where the edges of the slide are. Is there a way to show the slide dimensions?
Go ahead, John.
The easiest way I've found to do this is to just change your slide background while you're working at it, especially if you're in PowerPoint using the slide master, or in Keynote, it's called the slide layout. And you can change all the slides that have the same layout, change their background from light gray at the very end, switch it back to transparent, and you're done. Also, make sure you show your rulers, and you can add grid lines as well if that helps you navigate things.
Yeah, another thing that I do a lot is I'm zoomed out when I'm trying to figure these kind of things out. So if you look at it here, this is the edge of my slide right here, right there. And so I zoom out far enough that you can see that this is showing me what's gone out of the frame as opposed to what's in the frame. So a lot of times I do that to just know where I'm at as I work through those. Next question.
Jason Robershaw from Sarasota, Florida. Keynote now offers dynamic backgrounds. Do you use these? And they're too much movement for Zoom? Is there an equivalent in PowerPoint?
Go ahead, John Preto.
So I just did a medium-sized presentation, a couple hundred people, and I used the dynamic backgrounds for my opening slide and my closing slide. And so while they were introducing me and having lunch, I left that dynamic slide out there. It looks great. And then on my ending slide during the questions, I used the dynamic backgrounds. It looks great.
You go, John.
I generally don't like a full-size dynamic slide, so sometimes I'll pick one of the dynamic slides and then block out a bunch of it with a big, large rectangle. In Zoom, especially the rainbow ones, just look kind of greenish-brownish to me, and so I don't typically use them there. In person, I think they look great. PowerPoint does not have the ability to do that. You can put a video, a full-screen video in the background of a slide, have it run automatically, have it loop. But once you advance the slide itself, the video starts over, so it's a very obvious transition.
In general, most of those moving slides do not do well inside of any kind of presentation tool, WebRTC. They oftentimes don't do great in live streaming in general, but they really don't do well in WebRTC. In real time, they're not necessarily very effective. They'll break up a lot. You'll see a lot of blocking, a lot of gradient issues. So I'd be careful with those. Next question.
Robert Sababity in Poland asking, what are the best practices when broadcasting speakers presenting slides? Is it better to show just the slides like here in office hours or show both? Are there any guidelines as to when the proportions of the speakers versus the slides should be showing or both?
You know, it definitely helps. If it's going to be a long presentation, then I think bringing the speaker up and finding a way to do that makes sense. And you can even do that. I don't think I have it quite set up for this in here. I might be able to try and do it, but you can bring a speaker up inside of Keynote. So you can actually tell Keynote, I want a live video slide and I want to have this person pop up in that live video. And I think you can do that with PowerPoint as well. The real issue there is that processing does take a bunch of frames. And so you now have a different audio delay in your pipeline because the video is going to be a little behind. So that can be a little difficult if you're inserting it in. If you're using your video production tool, then you can build super sources or DVEs that will bring that person over top. The thing that you want to think about as you start to do that is your layout. Is your layout ready for a person to be there? So that's the thing you want. Like, does that make sense, or is that person going to be over top of something? So you do have to think about the entire pipeline of what you're doing, so that when the person pops up, they pop up into a space that looks like it belongs and doesn't look like they're just over top of something. And so you can definitely do those things. It does help maintain some attention. I will say that if people's presentations are longer than 5 or 10 minutes, the drop-off rate is intense. Like, just so you know, like, it's really like playing a keynote. We did eye tracking. So we looked for passive versus active listening. And what we found was that if you talk for about 6 minutes straight in a presentation, you can answer questions, but if you talk for about 6 minutes straight about a subject that doesn't have a question connected to it, the active listening will drop by 75% in about 6 minutes. And if you put up a slide, you have 60 to 90 seconds before that people start doing something else. Like, they literally just move you to a window, start checking their email. And if you think about it, when you sit at these events, I think about it a lot because we had to shoot videos of people watching these presentations, on big stages. And when you want to shoot crowd reaction videos and when they're talking about some subject, trying to find a group of people that we can shoot where one person isn't partially asleep or looking at their phone was almost impossible. There's a lot of really close-ups, of people because there was someone around them that was like, whoa, they were like down, or they were back like this, or they were checking their email. And so they didn't look like they were paying attention, which of course we were trying to make it look like everyone was paying attention. No one was. So anyway, so it really hasn't changed much. So, I like to cut back and forth. So I like to do a lot of this because it's more violent from a person's perspective of it actually wakes your brain up a little bit more than doing it. So I'll jump back and forth and say something as I go, and I'd rather do that when you keep the frame static. When you appear over top of it and then you're talking about it for a long time, it tends to put people back to sleep. Go ahead, Mitchell.
I used to do a lot of infomercials, and the classic ooh and ah and the crowd reactions. Couldn't you can a bunch of reactions and just sit there and fire them off somewhere in the
People
truck?
do that. They have them. You can put them on a big. They did that during COVID for a lot of the games. So when you were watching a game with no crowds, they actually had a, just one of those control surfaces, an ovation or whatever control surfaces, and they just hit them all, and they'd have intense claps and lower, but it feels canned really fast. And I think that I personally can't watch it. As someone who's worked on them, I now can't watch a show with laugh tracks. Like if I hear laugh tracks, I can hear the laugh track, and I can't watch the show. Yeah, go ahead, John.
It's also important to remember from a retention perspective that human beings cannot read and watch video simultaneously. They get super distracted. So especially if your slide has any text on it, if the person's talking and there's text on the slide, your audience is doing one of two things. They're either watching the person, reading the text on the slide, or I guess the third thing is not paying attention at all.
I have almost no text. All of my presentations are all just graphics that underline what I'm trying to talk about. I'm using my presentation to illustrate what I'm saying, not trying to say things with my presentation. That's crazy. So anyway, so yeah, definitely think about that as people go. And I know that a lot of people say, well, that's not what people do. Well, they should. Like anybody that teaches you about presentations, the first thing they'll tell you is to take all that text off the screen. That'll be the first thing that they'll tell you to do. Yet most of the presentations we see are just littered with text debris. Next question.
Jeffrey Reyes in Bronx, New York has a question. I've started recently learning Unreal Engine. It's used for creating video games, but could it also be a good choice for building lower thirds, overlays, and other types of broadcast graphics?
Go, Mitchell.
Generally not. It's sort of like buying a Ferrari to make your DoorDash deliveries. Yeah, it'll work, but it's a lot of expense and a little bit of overkill. You got to get the right tool for the right job.
Good, Courtney.
Yeah, the exception to this is you'll see it a lot of times on network weather presentations where they have the weather person walk into the weather map and things will pop out in a virtual set, pop out of the floor, or weather map will pop out of the floor. So if you want to create graphics that are interactive with your presenter, that go behind the presenter or in front of the presenter, then Unreal Engine will let you render those graphics and animate them in a 3D space, which is what you may need to do. And of course, it doesn't hurt to learn Unreal Engine because it's a good talent to learn. You probably aren't going to use it, like Mitch said, in your normal lower thirds, though.
Yeah, the big challenge with Unreal in general is aliasing. So you'll see it. You'll even see it in broadcast graphics that are using Unreal Engine right now. Is the anti-aliasing, which requires oversampling, isn't perfect, and so you'll see little things crawling up the edges of curved surfaces or angled surfaces. And you'll see that in big broadcast graphics, you'll see that that's a problem there. So if you're doing the AR experience or whatever, Unreal is the right way to go. For basic graphics is probably not something that I would use right now, mostly because of that aliasing problem. If you're able to render it and oversample that, then that might be a different story. Next question.
David Brady from New York asks, while not exactly on track with the topic, when using Zoom's screen share, what is the default frame rate? Under the Advanced tab, there are options to reduce it, presumably to conserve bandwidth.
Yeah, as best it can. Like that, I'm pretty sure that's the screen. That's there is no set frame rate when you give Zoom a screen share. So it's dependent on what screen you're sharing, how big it is. One of the things that's really problematic is sharing something that's not the same aspect ratio, because you'll end up with a record that is really funky. And so generally, you have up to about 6 megs, 6.2, 6.25 megs of bandwidth that Zoom can use, or that it'll allow itself to use. And you can have that in frame rate, or you can have it in resolution. When you do a screen share, it's deciding, you want to make sure that all the text is really sharp and everything else, and so it prioritizes that. It doesn't it does that at the cost of frame rate. And so that frame rate it'll depend on what you're doing and how you're playing it, but it definitely is rarely 30 frames a second. It's usually more like 4, 4 frames a second or 8 frames a second, but it's nice and sharp. Yeah, go ahead, Courtney.
I always wondered, this relates to this question, is if you're using screen share in Zoom, is there a way to turn off the gallery so that it's just the screen full screen, because when people are demonstrating software with, drop down menus and things that you may need to read, if it's scaled down to, 40% of your screen or 60% of your screen to allow room for the image of the person presenting on the side, then I find that the stuff they're trying to show us is unreadable to some degree. Plus, it has to keep up a frame rate to keep that person's picture on the side. I guess it increases the frame rate of them as well. So,
yeah, if I remember correctly, I mean, and I have to admit, because I have a video sharing tool, I very rarely, because I can cut stuff in and out, I very rarely use. I hate the screen share, so I will very rarely use it unless. But if I know that, for instance, I'm going into a meeting that has lower resolution, so if someone doesn't have a 1080p account, now I'm in a pickle because they are going to be really short. So the way that I do that, by the way, and this is not really part of the show, but is I send my switcher feed to my QuickTime, and I set QuickTime to a full screen on a computer, and I screen share that. And by screen sharing that computer, I get all the resolution back. I still lose my frame rate, but I get my resolution back, and now I can cut and draw over top of things and do all the things that I was doing before. I just don't have the frame rate that I had before. So that's one way to kind of manage that. Next question.
Jason Robertshaw from Sarasota, Florida has a question. In Final Cut, why does that red plugin not working error happen, and how do you fix it?
Typically, that is a upgrade issue. So you've upgraded Final Cut, or the operating system is upgraded, and that plugin is not kept up with that upgrade. And the best way to handle that is make sure that the plugin is upgraded, or contact the plugin manufacturer, who probably already knows because 20 other people have sent them emails saying, hey, your plugin isn't working anymore. That's why developers for Final Cut get betas. They're supposed to fix this. And so sometimes the library changes can be significant, and that causes more trouble. Next question.
Greg Kramer from Washington, D.C. For running graphics, do you still favor PlaybackPro? Also, can you recommend low or no-cost alternatives with similar function?
Go ahead, Mitchell.
Free version of QLabs.
Yeah. What does the free version of QLab do?
Very little.
Okay, yeah. So very little, yeah. So we don't recommend PlaybackPro, and it's really a sad story, because it was someone who was thinking outside the box and really doing something great. And in the entertainment, or not in the event industry, not in the entertainment industry, but in the event industry, there was a time when PlaybackPro was the standard. Like if we went to any event, you had, I probably at one time, I think I owned maybe 10 or 12 licenses of PlaybackPro, and we had them on laptops, and we had some on keys, and some on, and you used them all the time. Here's why, is because what they did, I think it's DV Video or whatever, or DV something. They wrote their own driver, their own system to play back perfectly. So it would always play back the frames that you gave it, and it would kind of ignore the operating system. And that worked great until Apple started updating that operating system. And so they couldn't keep up with the updates. And there were two things that happened at the same time. They couldn't keep up with the updates that Apple was doing to its subsystem, and Apple was creating a playback system that was so stable that lots of other people could just write to it and just go, give me that. And so PlaybackPro was not able to keep up with it. Some of us went to PresenterPro because of the alpha channel, the key fill, because when QLab came out, it took them a couple of years to get to a key fill system. And so a lot of us had started using PresenterPro, which is mostly used for House of Worship, but worked great for that kind of output. You will see that, QLab is a great solution to do this playback. It will do key fill. It'll do a lot of cues. On the higher end, if you need 10-bit, which is something we need, Softron's on the air is something that I think is on air. Softron though is what we use there. You have QLab. There's MIDI, MITTI, I believe, that is a relatively cost-effective way to do it, and it doesn't have all the tools that everybody else has, but it's probably MIDI is probably the one that is the closest to the tool set of PlaybackPro. It doesn't have, and it also, the big thing with QLab that worried us a lot when we first got it was it's capable of playing two videos at one time to two different screens, but you can accidentally play a video over top of another one, which made us crazy. And by the way, I was corrected. I meant to say ProPresenter, not PresenterPro, which I've made the mistake of going back and forth on that for about a decade. Next question.
From Stephen Montaigne from Madison, Wisconsin. When a client hands you a logo file with green elements in it, options for keying without losing parts of the logo.
Go ahead, John.
Use a Luma key instead, which does it based off of pixel brightness instead of color.
Yeah, and what you saw me do here, let me see if I can go back. So, for instance, this, oh, I didn't key it. I'm using a Luma key. I'm not using a chroma key. So if you look at what I have here, I can go into this. Let's see if I escape this. No. I can change that color to green and it wouldn't matter because I'm only looking at the black levels, not the green levels. In fact, most of the time when I do graphics like this, I will do them with a Luma key. And the reason for that is if you use a green background on them, generally your file is for whatever you're going through to your switcher is 422, not 444, which means that unless there's something really special in there, the Luma key will often look better than the green key, because the green color is being subsampled at 422, not 444, and the Luma key is 444. So it seems like the green would be better, but it's often not better, especially with curved edges, or even sometimes transparencies. Go ahead, Mitchell.
Yeah, Keynote has a cool masking capability. So if it's over white, you just pop that and it'll give you that instant.
Yeah. So the problem with that, it kind of works, but it's really hard to get that perfect key. So a lot of times when you do if it's a sharp edge, it works great. But if there's any kind of like a drop shadow or there's anything at all that is a little off, you'll end up with little white edges that go over top of that. So if you pull that out and put it over top of black, oftentimes the key isn't perfect.
Yeah, you can do it. You could pop it into Photoshop and do that too.
Yep, absolutely. Next question.
Roscoe Jones, Madison, Indiana. What are the issues with frame rates when using animation in non-broadcast apps for video work? Are there workarounds?
Whoops, we lost that one there. I think we went past it. Hold on, let me. I think we this is going to be. I'm pulling some of these back there. We had kind of a double fire there. Okay, what are the issues? It's. I'm not entirely sure what Roscoe means by what the issues are with frame rate, but I think part of the problem is that a lot of things don't use a very standard frame rate to output things. I think that's what he's talking about there, and I think that the workarounds is that it won't look perfect in a lot of those areas when you do that. I don't know what the workarounds are to drive that home if that's what you mean. Next question.
Next question in from Douglas Carmichael. What could Keyboard Maestro or a similar tool be used for controlling Keynote in a broadcast workflow?
Yeah, you can. There is what I'm doing here, by the way, is when I'm, running this animation, I'm running with a Stream Deck. So I've got a little Stream Deck. So you can see my little arrows. That I very quickly built for it. So I just have these little arrows here, and I don't do a lot else with it, but it sits here. And when I do presentations, because I don't want to change my keyboard back over to control it, I just simply push forward and it'll do its thing. So you can definitely do that. There is a way for you to, as you go into play out, I don't have it quite set up here, but you can select slides as well. So you can double click on a slide that you want to go to next and then hit play. So you don't have to do it in the order that Keynote has it in. When you're in the speaker view, you can be changing, you can jump to it. So you can have a bunch of lower thirds and grab the ones as they're needed, as opposed to if they were in the next slide or not. Next question.
John Snyder here in the panel in Reno, Nevada. What advantages does working with SVG have when using presentation tools for broadcast?
Go, John.
The biggest one you'll see is you can scale up or scale down the item without losing resolution. The other things, though, it's a shape instead of an image, which allows you to use things like Boolean tools to cut out masks if you'd like to, as well as change colors of individual elements of that item, which can be really handy in different animations.
Absolutely. Go ahead, Courtney.
Yeah, what John said, if you don't know whether it's going to be broadcast in 720, 1080, 8K, 4K, it'll scale up and it'll always look smooth at every resolution that you scale it to.
Go ahead, Mitchell.
as what everybody just said, it's very small file and it mathematically describes the shapes. So as he said, you can scale it, but you can also break them apart and have control over the color and the size of the shapes and do all kinds of other stuff without it turning into a bitmap mess.
And a lot of that is, at least for Keynote, is brand new. So the newest version of Keynote, if you haven't upgraded, will now take SVGs as shapes. So before this, we could still import, I believe, SVGs, but we could definitely bring in EPS files and so on and so forth. But they were an image. They were still resolution independent. You could zoom them up and down. They were still small. Those all of that worked in Keynote, but it didn't consider it a shape. And now that it's considered a shape, as said before, you can now do Boolean functions. You can also fill it with a certain color if you're trying to match color schemes. So there's a lot of other advantages to it there. Yeah, go ahead, John.
Yeah, and I brought this up specifically because it's new to Keynote. It's been in PowerPoint for several years.
Right.
One thing I don't know if you can do in Keynote, but you can do in PowerPoint, you probably can do it in Keynote, is with the magic move features, because these are shapes, you can actually have one shape morph into another shape with a magic move or morph transition. It works it works easily in PowerPoint. I have not tried that in Keynote, but you could have your icon turn into a sphere or whatever you needed it to do.
I think it does. But I haven't tested it, so we'll take a look at that. Next question.
Douglas Carmichael, I remember seeing Tuomo Kolumaa using the SPX interface to trigger graphic elements for office hours space. Can SPX dynamically manage playback speed and parameters, or does that need to be changed in the template?
Go ahead, John.
We wrote our own telemetry application from the flight computer. And when it reached certain milestones, it would trigger SPX graphics dynamically. But it was all bespoke and custom written. I don't know if he's integrated that now into SPX or not, but that's how it worked.
Go ahead, Mitchell.
Yeah, well, I think those templates are all HTML. So if you know your way around CSS and HTML, you're going to be able to make those adjustments in the template itself.
Next question.
Next question is from Gordon Lake in Los Angeles, California. When key fill is needed, is ProPresenter still a good tool to use?
Overall, ProPresenter is a great tool. So it's a good. It's not as when it did it 10 years ago, it was unique. So ProPresenter was the only tool that could do that as software on a Mac. So we used it a lot for that. But nowadays, there's a lot of other things that will do it. And by the way, when we talk about PlaybackPro, not Playback, I was talking about Mac stuff, but for those of you who are looking for Playback, also remember that there is Playout B, which is available on the Windows, Raspberry, and Mac. And it will do a lot of the playout stuff. I don't think it does key fill right now, but I do believe it'll do alpha channels inside of a Chrome, the kind of the Chrome window alpha channels there, but I'm not sure if it'll output key fill itself. But that's another. Playout B is very inexpensive. It's written by Jonas Dottel, who's in our in office hours and part of the dev team and everything else. And so I was mistaken for not mentioning that a little earlier. Go ahead, Courtney.
I was just going to mention this because we haven't mentioned it so far. For static lower thirds and graphics, that there is a plugin for the ATEM switchers for Photoshop, so that if you can have a version of Photoshop running, you can modify your lower third graphics really quickly and just drag them into the media file to the media area of the ATEM, and they'll come in with a transparent background and key and fill automatically. So you don't have to worry about exporting them with a key and fill and then importing them. You just drag and drop them, and it maintains the transparency.
Yeah, and a couple of different ways we've done that in the past is we also have in Keynote, we'll export all those slides. If they're stills, we export all the we build them all up and export them all out as 30 slides or whatever, and just drag them into our, which is very quick to do that. The other thing we've done is written scripts. So you can write a script in Photoshop that will go and look at we've done this for presentations. So we have lots of sessions, and we have, let's say, 5 or 6 people for each session. We had a spreadsheet, Google Doc, that it would go look at. I think we converted to Excel for right before the show, but I don't think it looked at the Google Doc itself. Anyway, the point is, it would go look at it, grab the things that it had, including Twitter handles. Does it have a Twitter handle? Does it not have a Twitter handle? Import those all into Photoshop and output them. What we had was just one template that was the lower third in Photoshop, and it would just go grab them and export them, and it would put them all in order in the switcher. So you just hit this button and it would just go, and it would just fill your switcher with all the stills. And so that can be, and it even makes that, it doesn't make that noise. We should add it though. Just as it puts it out there, that would be a really good one. Go ahead, Mitchell.
I notice a weird thing when you're doing that export function into ATEM from Photoshop is that's the best way to go. But if you just create transparent ping files, sometimes they come in green. So it's some kind of weird glitch.
Yeah. We found that what's interesting is if you download the ones that come out of Photoshop, it does appear that it's generating a ping, but we have almost always found that a TGA imports better. The way it handles the alpha channel, the TGA handles better, especially when you're dealing with fine graphics. And unfortunately, we wish that, TGA is such an old format. People are like, when you talk to a development team about, hey, can you support TGA? They're like,
what's a TGA? Targa file? What's a Targa?
Remember the Targa cards?
Yeah, remember that new show called The A-Team? It's like, why are we here? Why are we having this conversation? I think the A-Team was new when Targa was new. And anyway, so I think people kind of feel like you're coming out from the past, but the advantage that it has there's a whole other thing with it, but the advantage that TGA has is that it handles the alpha channel completely separately in how it processes it. So there's a whole RGB channel and a entire alpha channel, and that's easier for the ATEM to handle because the ATEM shortcuts the key slightly. So it doesn't invert it only keys over. It does what's it expects a pre-multiplied alpha channel, and so it doesn't do a reverse punch on the RGB channel. It just simply goes, I'm going to punch out the background for it, and then I'm going to set it on top of it, and it saves it a processing pass, but it makes other things not work as well. Next question.
Next one in from Peter Belbin in Houston, Texas. Which apps on both PC and Mac are able to directly output via Blackmagic designed DeckLink output devices?
Good, Mitchell.
It's probably easier to say which ones don't, because pretty much all of them do. Either that or the AJA cards are pre-built for that.
Thanks to the panel. It was good. It was a good show. It was good. I thought that it was useful for people to see. The goal here is not to say that you should start. What we hope you don't leave with is the only way to do graphics now is to use Keynote or PowerPoint or something else. That's not the point. The point really is that you can do a lot of those things. And when we got started doing live streaming, I was doing everything out of Keynote. We were doing these streams, and we didn't know how to do any of the graphics, and it was really nice and fluid and change. And I still use Keynote, where I'm keying either myself over top of Keynote or Keynote over top of me. I'm still doing all of those things on a regular basis, and I think that it's definitely definitely worth knowing how to do it, especially if you are getting started, if you are even in the middle of the process, but also if you're doing really high-end presentations, you can use all the stuff sitting over top of you, and it definitely looks nice as you go to do that. Also, finally, if you're an educator. So if you're an educator, you have these tools. They're not very expensive, and you can make your whole presentation look a lot better. So hopefully that helps a lot. Thank you to the panel for a great conversation, both in the first and the second hour. And thanks to the incredible crew on the back end. There is an incredible crew that is doing all the stuff that you see here. We don't edit any of this. There's people cutting the show. There's people making sure that we're ready for the show. There's people managing the show. There's people developing all the tools that are necessary. There's people trying to figure out what's going to be on tomorrow. Incredible team on the back end. So we just really want to thank everybody for your contribution here. If you're interested in being on that team, definitely let us know. You'll see a link to join for volunteers in the email that goes out, and we'd love to have you. It's a great network to have. There's lots of people that are doing this together. So if you're interested, go ahead and jump into that. And again, thanks to the producers. Great set of questions today. I think it really. I will say, as a host and a panelist, it feels great when you get it, when you enter the hour. When we enter the hour and there's like 4 questions, we're like, oh, this is going to be hard. We're going to have to talk a lot. When we get in and we see 18, 20 questions, this is going to be a good show. like this is going to be, we're going to be rocking. And so we really want to thank you for all the great questions and the voting and everything else. It was good. It was a good show today. It's a good show. just about every day. But it's an exceptionally good show and easier for us as we go through that. Another quick reminder that we have the workshop today at 12. We're moving into 12 Pacific Standard Time. That's 3 p.m. And that means that more of our European friends can join us. If you're interested, if you're trying to figure out, oh, how do we do the panel, or how do I cut the show, or how do I do a reader, or how do I do all those things we're practicing all together, it's turned out to be a really fun day to do that. So there's, I think now we've gotten kind of to a point where you kind of feel like you need a little bit of practice before you get on. And so that's a great place to practice. And again, that's at 12 p.m. Pacific Standard Time, and that's 3 p.m. You'll see more of that in the email that goes out. So take a look for that. We traveled 74,000 miles today, 119,000 kilometers. That's more than 590 bananas for scale. This is the specific banana that we count as our scale. Let's go ahead and jump into After Hours. I feel like I need to. Unfortunately, I have a couple copies of this banana, because if I lost the banana, we might lose the scale.
A little bouncing animated banana that goes.
I need to do a little banana. Have them all stack and go across the screen. Godzilla. Dude,
what?
I was just watching Godzilla the other night. It was on, I don't know, it was on YouTube or something. I was like, there's Godzilla. I have to watch part of it. My preference is Godzilla versus Mothra. That's my favorite.
That's the original, yes.
The little villagers singing.
If you see Asteroid City, watch the end credits for the Roadrunner.
Beep, beep. All right.
Dances.